NLGJA recognizes Stephen Thrasher, staff writer for the Village Voice. Yes, give it up. And writer for the New York Times, and out as its Journalist of the Year. The awards committee observed, quote, whether it is about multi-generational gay families, a homeless shelter for LGBT youth, or a controversial political dynasty involved in New York's same-sex marriage battles, Thrasher's work succeeds at being interesting and unexpected. A keen interviewer and a beautiful writer, his willingness to move beyond the usual and convert LGBT lives has hit its peak. Mr. Thrasher.
Good evening. Before I start, or I guess as I'm starting, the first thing I want to say is there's nobody in the world that I would be more honored to follow up here than Chris Geidner. I've had the wonderful pleasure of getting to know him over the past couple of years as our paths have crossed. I call him my homo journo brother from another mother, as we'd say back in Brooklyn, because he's exactly 1 month younger than me, so we're almost the same age. But beyond Chris's wonderful journalistic ability, I am so impressed with his ability to wear his heart on his sleeve about how lucky we are to have this job. Each and every one of us in this room who is privileged to earn their living as a journalist is so blessed. So Chris, congratulations to you on your honor. Now for the rest of you, my fellow homosexual journalists, I'd like to talk to you tonight about the word access. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I'm going to start with sort of a coming out story regarding something I haven't admitted publicly before. I write long-form features, investigative features, which sometimes drop some controversy by the time I'm done with them months after I've started working on them. And people have come up to me from one time or the other and told me that they thought that I was courageous or brave for publishing some story. And this embarrasses me deeply, mostly because my primary impulse when something inflammatory goes live is that I want to crawl under my bed and hide. And I don't just want to get under the covers, I want to get under the entire bed and just hide from the world. I don't give in to that impulse, but the feeling is there, even though I have no one to blame but myself for picking the stories that I write about. And I've been trying to think as young journalists ask me how I approach my stories, what my motto is, and the best I can summarize is this. I want to give voice to the voiceless so that the powerless can be heard. And I also want to give such hell to the powerful that they'll routinely need Rolaids. Now, to do either of these effectively, to tell any story really, you have to have access, and how you get it, how you navigate that is something that I've continually worked at that I find very difficult. So travel back in time with me a little bit as I think about two of my heroes who got really great access to a story. It's a Sunday night in Greenwich Village in the summer of 1969. My predecessor at the Village Voice, Howard Smith, is covering a skirmish at a local bar near our offices at the time called the Stonewall Inn. Smith starts talking to the cops, and he winds up inside the bar with them as they barricade themselves from the, quote, powerful rage bent on vendetta. Outside, my other predecessor, Lucian Truscott IV, gets the exterior perspective. He sees a kind of liberation as the gay brigade emerged from the bars, the back rooms, and bedrooms of the village and became street people. The reaction was solid. They were pissed. Not everyone would agree with how colorfully these two wrote their stories. In fact, when they were printed a few days later, an angry mob descended upon the Village Voice offices and threatened to burn it to the ground. But Smith and Truscott were there. Even in harm's way, they were there. And because of their journalism, 43 years later, we're there too. Their words transport us. Smith and Truscott got their access the hard way by going to cover an event. No one knew what it would become. No one had any clue that it would spark a revolution that would change the world. They got access by watching and listening to people in person. And as for those agitators who caused the story itself, they didn't have a publicist. They had no talking points. There was no Facebook campaign, and no media team vetted the protesters and kept the most vulgar among them from talking to the press. The first stories of the gay rights movement were as simple as the exchange between reporters and subject. My fellow journalists, 43 years later, we have a level of access and reporting about LGBT matters that was unheard of when the Stonewall riots occurred. In 1969, the Village Voice was about as close as you could get to a mainstream publication that published stories about homosexuals, let alone openly employed them. It would be another 13 years before the Voice became the first private employer in the nation to offer benefits for same-sex partners and employees. The play The Normal Heart dramatizes how, even when the plague descended upon our community, LGBT journalists couldn't easily be out even at the New York Times. There is still a great deal more work to do here. But because of many brave men and women living openly, including members of my union, including many people in this room, including Mr. Wicker, we now have the privilege, some of us, of getting to chronicle the stories of LGBT people as LGBT people openly ourselves. This is an amazing opportunity. And now that there are also LGBT people in the highest echelons of business and government, we now sometimes have access to them. How are we going to use that access? How will we use that access when they're in the big house and we can get into the big house? Or they're in the White House and we can get into the White House? My fellow journalists, I humbly suggest to you that our work is more important than ever now because of this access. But conversely, the more access we have, the more we must work as journalists and disregard whether our work will make us lose that access or not. And we have to worry about whether people like us or not. This is something I think that's becoming extremely difficult because our profession, as many people's does, increasingly creates pressure to get people to like us. We want people to like our Facebook stories, we want people to like our Facebook fan page. And most insidiously, PR people want us to like us and for us to like them. They want us to like the access that they can offer, which can come at a price. And when a PR person is LGBT and their client is LGBT, they can prey on our gayness to get us to like them when we should be critical of whatever it is that they're trying to sell us. We are journalists, first and foremost. This is such an exciting period in LGBT history to have access, and the stories that we tell might not be stories that people like, or that might not make people like us. Our job is to give rise to stories people wouldn't find on their own, and to use that access to ask questions others can't ask. Now, those of you who are familiar with my work in New York know that I've tussled a bit with Gay Inc. recently, particularly with the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. There is, I must grudgingly admit, some good in what GLAAD does, and they are extremely gracious about meeting with me. But GLAAD has also described itself as a PR firm for the LGBT community, a phrase that's something that doesn't ring with me as a journalist. And while there may be some value in PR for their job, PR is not our job. As a great sign I saw in an Occupy event read, unless someone is angry, it's not journalism, it's just public relations. And as our LGBT community as a whole gets more access to power, to money, to influence, we need more press and not more press relations. I had kind of a fun exchange recently with the head of PR for the LGBT Center in New York, a woman named Cindy Krieger. The center has refused to return any of my calls or emails over the past year, since I'd written critically about how they take into censoring political speech based on their donors' agenda. I also pointed out that their board of directors refuses to meet with the public. In July, after a year of them not returning my messages, I started posting questions on their Facebook wall. So they blocked me from their Facebook wall. So then I finally just showed up at the center, knocked on the door of their press rep, and walked into her office. And boy, let me tell you, few things are funnier than a press rep being greeted by an actual member of the press. Krieger called for backup, who told me it was highly inappropriate for a journalist to be asking a press representative questions. But it is not inappropriate for me to think that a press representative of a publicly subsidized community center should speak to the press. That is my job. That is their job. And if they don't like me for it, it's okay. I mean, I'm sure Mitt Romney will probably release his tax returns before they answer any of my questions, or before HRC returns any of my calls. But I'm going to keep asking them. And it's not inappropriate. This is what we are paid to do. It's not inappropriate to demand answers for questions of people like Linda Testone, who's the center's executive director. This is something I think that's really important that we as LGBT journalists in the mainstream press and the LGBT press really need to focus on right now. Krieger and Testone both come from GLAAD, and this is significant. Many PR firms want to say, don't you worry your pretty little head digging around. We'll tell you what the story is. But we are journalists. We find the story. We don't outsource it to anyone of any sexual orientation, and we cannot accept anyone's spin, even if they might just happen to be someone that we might want to sleep with. We can't let any PR firm ever, tell us what we should or should not be writing about, because no PR firm, even an LGBT PR firm, would have said, yes, press, go and cover this riot with a bunch of underage kids at a dive bar that has ties to the mob. And yet that's the kind of story that is most significant about why we are in this room and be able to lead the lives that we do today. And by the way, I also want to give a shout out to one of the best journalists I think working today, Bill Browning at the Blerico Project, because when it comes to letting an organization like GLAAD set the agenda, we wouldn't know what GLAAD's agenda was without the fantastic kick-ass journalists that the Blerico Project is doing. Look around at the major gay organizations and progressive groups and nonprofits. HRC, Color of Change, the LGBT Center, they're staffed with GLAAD alumni. What happens, as an astute colleague of mine noted, is that they work at a place like GLAAD and they learn to handle the press. And I'm sorry, but too often we do comply with them in that. And then they parlay that into a good job with the mindset that any criticism of their organization or them or their boss is anti-gay, which is simply not true. A current GLAAD employee called my legitimate reporting on Testone an attack that he wished would stop. But it was no such thing, it was journalism. I expect the executive director of New York's LGBT Center to answer questions from the Village Voice. She is paid partially with public money, a salary of $175,000 a year. Now that's a tad more than the governor of my state makes, and perhaps a little bit more than some of you make in this room. But a publicly subsidized servant of the people owes the people answers in exchange for these kinds of salaries. And it's our job to ask these public figures questions, tough questions, lesbian or not. We can't, as journalists, say that we'll give a free pass to the Testones of the world just for being lesbian, any more than we could give a free pass to Christine Quinn for being lesbian, or to Chad Griffin or Tim Cook for being gay, or to Barack Obama for being black. We must use our access to hold these people accountable as journalists at all times. And we can't ever do so with any hesitation or fear that our tough questions might not get us invited to the next gala dinner. Now, I might sound kind of angry, but the truth is, I actually don't like writing about the powerful all the time and dreaming up ways to give them heartburn. Long before my days recording for the NPR StoryCorps project, I've actually been far more interested in writing about the voiceless, about those who hold little formal power in our society and in our various communities. This, I believe, is equally important, my fellow journalists. In the other direction, we have access to the lowest amongst us in our communities. And we have access to share their experiences in ways that they never can. They are all around us. Their stories are silently screaming to be told. Tales of poverty might not drive SEO, but will we still access them? Last fall, the New York Times printed a story that my editor and I worked on for 7 months about one of the few homeless shelters run for LGBT youth. It was a terribly run shelter, and it was run very sadly by LGBT people. Our reporting showed that those kids were continuously in precarious, unsanitary, dangerous conditions. And some LGBT activists were not happy with my writing something critical of our community. Any roof is better than a gutter, they said. Why give homophobes ammunition against us? But if not us, who else will write honestly about these kids? Should we as LGBT journalists turn a blind eye to kids in our own community, as we have judged those in other communities of doing? Don't our readers deserve to know the real deal and not PR spin about a world they might not otherwise see? As a colleague of mine put it, we are detectives for the people, so that they may know something about LGBT life, no matter how unpredictable or messy or beautiful or ugly it may look. We're not here for people to like us, and it's a depressing thought, but I've come to realize that the longer I'm a journalist, the more likely it is that anyone will ever hire me to do anything else ever again. But that's okay. I think I'm in this one for life now. As journalists, we must be tough in our work, but we must also support each other. And I have been so beautifully supported by so many people. I just want to thank a few of them tonight. Most of all, my family, represented tonight by my brother James, my sister-in-law Wyatt, my sister-in-law Guadalupe, and my nephew Wyatt. My faith community, represented tonight by a man I've done a lot of time on my knees with in church, Mikado Murphy. My fellow writers who've helped me along the way, represented by Michael Luongo and Sharon Jackson, and all the wonderful editors I've worked with. One I want to give particular credit to for completely changing the altar of my career, David Shipley. After the Des Moines Register killed a piece that they were going to buy for $50, he then bought it and printed it on the op-ed page of the New York Times and changed my career forever. I have been so endlessly supported by the sources who have trusted me with the most intimate details of their life. And now I've been supported by the National Lesbian Gay Journalists Association. I am so extremely grateful to you for your vote of confidence in my work. It is touching, not just for me, but for so many others to have the kind of long-form storytelling that we can sometimes be frightened does not have a financial model. It's so great to have that kind of storytelling recognized in this way. Thank you for helping keep me and others on the long-form path, and for being an organization I don't just like, but more importantly, that I deeply respect. I want to end by coming out about one other thing. What I think about when a story is going to be published and I'm getting that nervous, twitchy feeling about the controversy it'll create. I think about my parents, who were the two bravest people I knew. And I think about my brother James's advice that the truth can make people uncomfortable, but that's just fine. I think about Howard Smith inside the Stonewall Inn and the queer protesters who stood up against the police in 1969. I think about Michael Luongo risking his life in Iraq or Gaza to literally bring us stories that we wouldn't get from anywhere else. And I think about those amazing homeless kids that I hung out with last year. It was tough for me to get through that story, and I had a bed to go home to at night. But those kids didn't. They'd been told by the world they were garbage. Their parents told them that when they kicked them out for being gay or trans. And the shelter that I was around about reinforced that when they told them they could sleep on the floor with rats. But they still had the courage to say, I think this is wrong, I deserve better, and I'm going to speak out about it. It is then when I realize it takes no courage to publish my stories. It is a mere gift to have access to them. All I have to do is not screw it up. NLGJA, I humbly thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving me the chance to live up to the trust my subjects place in me. And I give you my word that I will continue to use whatever access I have in the best way I know, even on those days when I want to crawl under my bed. Onward.
Thrasher, I want to make sweet love to you later.
I'm all open.